Our next speaker is Nick Warren from HSE, which I think is a health and safety executive. Nick, I've forgotten your job title. I think you've used chief stats modelling person.
That probably offends somebody somewhere. We're very hierarchical in the civil service.
As long as it doesn't offend you. And you can see Nick's title there, Agent-Based Modelling of Workplace Transmission in SARS-CoV-2. Nick, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So the work that I'm going to describe is part of the PROTECT program. So PROTECT is one of the 6 national core studies on SARS-CoV-2. And this work is it's a very PROTECT is a very varied program, but it contains within it a theme that relates to risk modelling, and there's a number of different varieties of models within that, looking at some quite narrowly at emission of virus from infected individuals, through to dispersion modelling within rooms and volumes, inner host modelling, and then transmission models, both at a sort of short time scale, so transmission sort of within a single event, occupancy of a room during a meeting or during a day or a train carriage, etc. And then the work that I'm going to describe is transmission modelling over a longer time scale, so multi-generational transmission within a workforce. And so the aim of this work really is to understand transmission risks in the workplace, and how they might differ between different types of workplaces, what influences those risks, and crucially, what effective control and mitigation measures there may be. And also to link this work with some of these higher fidelity models that I've previously described. And so just in terms of the scope, obviously workplaces are incredibly varied, and most environments are somebody's workplace. But the scope of this model is what I would call kind of closed workplaces. So workplaces without transient individuals who are not members of the workforce, or not. So workplaces without large numbers of such individuals. So that excludes sectors such as retail, hospitality, hospitals, public transport, etc. So this model isn't aimed at those; it's aimed at all the other workplaces, offices, manufacturing, warehousing, food production, etc. So it's a pretty standard epidemic model, SIR model. It's individual, it's stochastic, got a 24-hour time step. So the agents are the workers, the interactions between the agents are the contacts that they have. Those contacts are represented through a network, has most of the kind of standard features in terms of symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals and an incubation period, for instance. But we don't consider the severity of symptoms or hospitalization or other outcomes. So we've reduced the scale back to just consider infection and transmission. And then, and we've obviously reduced the scale to just a workforce rather than the whole of society. And then we've put in extra detail which relates to the transmission probability between pairs of individuals. So we utilize an exponential dose response, and that depends upon the duration and distance of contacts. It depends upon the workplace environment, particularly the ventilation, and then that can be affected by face coverings. And in all instances, it's also altered by the infectiousness of the infected individual, the infected half of the pair, on the particular day that the contact takes place. So in terms of the networks, and I had a much nicer picture than this, but then when I signed the consent form last night, it was asking me about copyright permissions and so forth. So I took it out and quickly put together something that wasn't quite so illustrative. So in terms of the workplace contacts, we use two contact networks. We use one contact network to represent short proximity contacts. So those are contacts under 2 meters where transmission will be predominantly via large droplets. And then we use a second network for medium proximity contacts, so 2 to 5 meters, where the transmission will be predominantly through finer aerosols that remain suspended in the air and travel further. And then each of those contact networks, the edges in the networks are weighted by the cumulative daily duration of contact between the pairs at that distance. And we use different contact networks for different days. So in the work that I'm going to show, we have 10 days worth of networks in total that have been measured using wearable tags for an office environment pre-pandemic. And then we shuffle those networks to create longer sequences of contacts for the periods of the simulations that we're interested in. And so I think one critical thing is that means that many of the contacts reoccur on consecutive days, or it might occur for a couple of days and then no contact might occur on the third day, and then there might be contact again. And I think that has quite an important influence, although quite difficult to fully tease out on things like generation times and how other factors to do with transmission interact and influence the generation times. We've got a number of different data sources to develop these networks with. It's fair to say that none of them are absolutely as good as we would like. The work that I'm going to present now uses pre-pandemic office contact levels. There are other sources as well. And then I think it's worth just flagging up that the Protect study is just launching a new study within it that's going to use ultra-wideband wearable technology to give us high-resolution contact data in a variety of different workplaces. So that will hopefully provide us with better data and data reflecting different types of workplaces, because there's no reason to suppose that contact patterns in an office are anything like what they are in food manufacturing, or indeed what they might be like in car manufacturing. So gaining contact data with this high resolution in terms of distance and duration of contacts in these different types of workplaces is quite a priority for us. So in terms of viral load and infectiousness, so we have an infectiousness profile. So overall, the infectiousness in our model varies both day to day, and it varies between individuals. So in terms of the day-to-day variation, we have an infectivity profile that's derived from serial intervals from early on in the pandemic, and that's represented by shifted gamma distribution. So that's the histograms and the plots on the right. And then we separately model an individual's viral load, and we model that through exponential proliferation and clearance phases with a variable peak viral load, which occurs on the day of symptom onset, with a Weibull incubation period, so time to symptom onset, or an equivalent point for asymptomatic individuals. And then the peak viral load is used to rescale the peak viral load for an individual is used to rescale the infectivity profile. So that brings it up or down according to their viral load, and that uses relationships that have been determined between viral load in PCR tests and secondary attack rates, and we use a relationship that's been found in test and trace in the UK, but actually that's remarkably similar to a relationship that's been found between viral load and secondary attack rates in a study of clusters in Catalonia, and another study looking at transmission in a university in the United States, Arizona, I think, off the top of my head. So the viral load, or the peak viral load, alters the infectivity profile, but the individual viral loads, we only use those to determine the sensitivity of lateral flow testing, if that's one of the control measures that we're simulating as being in place. And the intent is to replace this infectivity profile with a more comprehensive model of in-host viral dynamics. And in particular, what we would like to do is sort of get rid of the profile that's based upon the serial intervals and replace it with a profile that's derived entirely via in-host viral dynamics, linking it to viral load. But there's a bit in the middle which we think is quite important, which is viral shedding. So we think infectiousness is going to be more closely linked to viral shedding than viral load itself. So there's a number of longitudinal data sets that are becoming available, including the human challenge studies led by Wendy Barclay, that will hopefully provide data with which to refine that aspect of the model. So moving on to the transmission rates. So what I mean here is, by transmission rate, is I mean the probability of transmission during a contact or the cumulative contact over a 24-hour period between a pair of individuals. So I think the important thing to say here is that transmission rates in workplaces remain quite uncertain, and that they undoubtedly vary considerably between different types of workplaces. And so, and also that we don't really have any infection data at an aggregate workplace level with which to calibrate the model. So we don't know how many infections actually occur in the workplace. We might know, we have estimates for specific workplace outbreaks, where we might assume that the majority of transmission, or the majority of the infections, were due to transmission in the workplace. So that's one source of information. But of course, outbreaks are in their own right sort of unusual and not the usual situation, but the sort of exception, as it were, although quite common exceptions over the last year and a half. So our approach is rather than to sort of try and estimate the transmission rate, is to consider a range of transmission rates. And so there's two key parameters that control the risk of transmission per unit time at short and medium proximity. And so we've considered a credible region for those parameters, using various information sources, but particularly secondary attack rates, workplace secondary attack rates from test and trace. And we can feed those into our model, and the plot shows what's kind of gets spat out in terms of a workplace reproduction number, which is on the y-axis, and the proportion of the transmission that's due to the medium proximity contacts. So the blue region is what we think is a kind of credible region for the transmission parameters. And I suppose the key thing to take from that is with these contact patterns, these office contact patterns, it would be very difficult to get outbreaks unless the majority of transmission is due to medium proximity contacts, i.e. sort of being nearby to someone, but not within 2 meters of them. So without that being the majority of transmission, or there being a very significant contribution from fomite transmission, which isn't explicitly considered in the model, then we can't get our workplace reproduction number greater than 1. And so, although it's highly stochastic, broadly speaking, we wouldn't expect to get outbreaks. And if we did get one, it would be small and quickly go extinct. So then we've considered a number of different workplace control measures. So they're shown here. I've sort of grouped them into 3 categories. So this isn't the normal standard hierarchy of control, but we've got on the left-hand side various measures, testing and isolation, that essentially are, work by keeping the virus or keeping infected individuals out of the workplace. The middle category, which I've called workplace social distancing, which includes remote working, that reduces the opportunities for transmission between individuals by reducing contact between them. And the third category, which I've put vaccination in, is reducing the transmission risks between individuals when they do meet. So we've looked at all these different measures, and we've done that for a combination of transmission parameters within that blue region. And there's a whole set of assumptions around the control measures, which, well, some of them are listed here, but I won't go into. And so just quickly, because I'm running over, talk about some of the results. So the red dots here, so we've got workplace reproduction number on the y-axis on a log scale, and then the mean generation time along the x-axis. And these are 15 different sets of transmission parameters for short and medium proximity contacts, with no additional mitigations, save for 1/4 of symptomatic cases isolating. And then the simulations, these simulations assume 100% susceptible workforce with a single seed case. And so we've got a range of reproduction numbers between about 0.2 and going up to about 4, and variation in the mean generation times, and a tendency for smaller reproduction numbers to go hand in hand with longer generation times. So now here are all the control scenarios using those same 15 sets of transmission parameters, but now various controls and mitigations singly. So just each control on its own and not in combination with other ones. So all of these assume the same assumptions for viral dynamics and infectiousness, and they all use the same contact patterns. So now if we pick out some specific controls, so once weekly lateral flow testing, the effect, it reduces the workplace reproduction number by about 1/4, shortens the generation time, which I think you would expect, taking people, you're identifying people when they're pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic and removing them from the workforce. So that should shorten the reproduction, the generation time. And if you up the frequency, well, we move to lower reproduction numbers and shorter still generation times. Isolating the cases, similar sort of effect. So reduction so this is moving from 25% of symptomatic cases isolating to 75%. Reduces our workplace by about 1/4. That doesn't depend upon what the transmission parameters are. It doesn't depend upon what the routes of transmission are. But you can see that the effect on the generation time does depend upon the transmission, the particular combination of transmission parameters chosen. Then if we kind of move on to some of the other controls, kind of the picture gets a bit more complex. So face coverings, so now the effect depends on the relative importance of transmission via short and medium proximity contacts, which roughly correspond to large droplets versus aerosols. So wearing face coverings for just whilst in short proximity with another worker in the workplace with a high level of compliance, very effective if most of the transmission is occurring through short contact, or it's fairly effective. Doesn't achieve very much if most of it's via fine aerosols. Increasing ventilation, well, similar sort of effect. I'm just showing 2 points here because it gets a bit confusing with the sort of lines overlapping. So increasing the ventilation, I should say, so really the line should have an arrow on it, but I haven't put an arrow on it. So increasing the ventilation 5-fold, which is probably the upper limit of what might be achievable even in poorly ventilated places. So you move from the top left down to the top right. So the reproduction number reduces, the workplace reproduction number, and the mean generation time increases. But of course, if most of the transmission is via large droplets, and the assumption we've made about ventilation is that the large droplets and the transmission over short distances is not affected by increasing the ventilation, then you get very little impact whatsoever. Reducing the building occupancy, so we see a very large and consistent reduction in the reproduction number by reducing the building occupancy. So here everybody goes into the building, but only a third of well, 3 days in every week. So that's happening on a rotational basis. So it reduces transmission very considerably. The effect on the generation time depends upon the relative importance of the two different routes of transmission and the levels of those transmission. And finally, we've got an example which is to do with workplace vaccination. So 2 doses, leaky assumption, and that's roughly comparable in terms of its impact to reducing the building occupancy to 30% on any one day. And so just to finish off, I was going to show some examples. So it's the same type of plot now, but I've coloured it according to some sort of degree of control. So red is the reproduction numbers greater than 1. So workplace outbreaks are going to be likely, and unless additional mitigations are introduced, they're going to spread throughout the whole workforce. Amber or orange, the bit in the middle, the reproduction number is less than 1, so outbreaks are unlikely, but it's still a significant level of transmission in terms of controlling transmission at a whole societal level. So the green level, which I've arbitrarily sort of put in at a reproduction number of 0.3, is roughly speaking the sort of level of workplace transmission averaged across all workplaces in Great Britain. That's the sort of level of workplace transmission that might be compatible with keeping whole society reproduction number for an unvaccinated population less than 1. And so starting off with a high level of transmission, predominantly via aerosols, if we introduce twice weekly lateral flow testing, we make some useful steps towards achieving control. If we add on increased ventilation, threefold increase in ventilation rates, we get into the orange region where workplace outbreaks are perhaps unlikely, but we're still making a significant and too large a contribution to societal transmission. If we introduce 60% building occupancy, so that's working 3 days a week on a rotational basis, then now we're down under 0.3. And if we had a partially vaccinated workforce based upon uptake rates up to July 4th, which corresponds to about 50% of a typical UK workforce being vaccinated. Obviously, there'll be a lot of variation according to all sorts of factors within any particular workforce. Then that gets us towards a reproduction number of 1, but it doesn't get us there. But then if we introduce the twice weekly testing and the increased ventilation, then we get down to a comparable level to what we got before. So what we can see there is the vaccination is, it makes a very significant contribution, but it's, in many instances, it's not going to be sufficient in its own right to control workplace exposure, if that was the aim. So there's multiple paths, I suppose, from the red region to the green region, and what you need is a package of controls. And in any particular workforce, some controls will be more operationally practicable than other ones. So you can't have reduced building occupancy very easily in manufacturing production. You can't do your production from home. So building occupancy is not a viable one, but other things like face coverings might take their place in that sort of situation. So to summarize, well, there's a lot going on. The generation times are affected by, well, they're obviously affected by the infectiousness profile of individuals, and they're obviously affected by contact patterns, but over and above that, they're significantly influenced by workplace controls and environmental conditions, and those influences are not simple, but they also, for some of those controls and environmental aspects, depend upon the sort of relative importance of different routes of transmission and the levels of transmission. And I think that really, that complexity stems from the extra detail that we have in the model about patterns of contact. So in particular, you know, the fact that we're considering the distance at which contacts take place, how long the contacts take place, and that many of the contacts are repeating, but they're not necessarily repeating daily. But they're repeating with a whole range of different patterns. So I will conclude there and just acknowledge some of my co-workers at the Health and Safety Executive and some of my colleagues in Theme 2 of the Protect programme. Clearly not an exhaustive list of people from Protect, but these are individuals who've made very helpful comments and provided advice along the way. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Nick, thank you very much. Fantastic. I like very much that R versus GT and paths through it. That's a nice way of thinking about it. If anyone has questions for Nick, you can send them to the panel or to the Q&A box. If I can, there, I found the Q&A box. But I have a question first. So many workplaces had various measures in place, of course, over the last 18 months. Thinking beyond the workplace, you showed how some of those could have effect on generation time. Is there any point in this pandemic where those sort of COVID-safe measures in workplaces might have been enough to influence the generation time overall? Should we have been thinking about generation time shifting with these control measures in workplaces?
Oh, that's a very good question, that. I mean, I think overall, most transmission doesn't occur in the workplace. I mean, I think the largest amount is in households. So how much of this feeds through to the sort of composite generation times that you see for the whole of society? I mean, it's all going to be sort of attenuated and kind of squashed down, isn't it? So I mean, clearly isolation behavior, that applies in every setting. So so that's going to affect it at a whole societal level. Testing too. I mean, we've been lateral flow testing particularly children at school, so that's going to have, and that's probably one of the other big environments, I suppose. You know, I mean, the environments of work, school, education, home, and then sort of leisure and socializing. So I guess the testing will have had an effect as well. Not so sure about some of the other factors, or indeed to what extent things like ventilation are being altered in people's households. Probably not very much, I would guess.
Okay, thank you. It's a troubling question, isn't it, in retrospect? Thank you. There's 3 questions come up. I think we're going to just take one, and then maybe you can think about the others and answer those people directly or through the Q&A. The one we're going to take is from Amy Thomas. Have you looked at how differing patterns of shift work in closed environments may influence R?
So clearly working patterns are important. So the only things that we've investigated to date are essentially contacts occurring every day, which hopefully doesn't occur for too many workers. Hopefully not many workers are in the workplace 7 days a week versus a 5-day pattern. So we've looked at that, and obviously that affects R, and it affects the generation times. You know, I guess there's a whole range of different workplace working shift patterns that are possible, you know, and certainly some production sites will have multiple shifts, so that production is 24 hours and they might have 3 working shifts per day. And in theory, those shifts don't come into contact with one another because they're separate shifts, but they may well do at the point that shifts transition. I mean, the outbreak investigations that are kind of going on within Protect might provide some insight into whether that's a risk. I think what I'm hearing from our outbreak investigations in general is that there's a feeling that a lot of the transmission occurs sort of not during the sort of everyday usual work activity, but sort of around the periphery of it. So that might be people coming in and out of the site. It might be people having breaks. It might be people. I heard one anecdote about bus drivers who had a 30-minute get together in the morning to sort of discuss the work and the day's work, and that might be where the transmission was occurring. So so there could be interactions between different shifts as well. But the short answer is we've only compared 5 days with 7 days.
Got it, thank you. And presumably shift work, you know, there doesn't have to be direct face-to-face interactions. It could be environmental overlap with a gap as well, might be important.
Yeah.
Anything. Yeah. Nick, you've got a bunch more questions in Q&A, and one also in the chat from Jasmina. Perhaps if you've got time, could you respond to those in chat to all attendees?
I will try to, yeah.
Thank you very much. So